To be a truly deeply spiritual person, you have to commit 4 murders. The first thing is I have to murder my ego. It's not that I get rid of it, but that I realize my ego is not myself. My ego is just the CEO of a particular state of consciousness. But I have to murder it and knock it into second position. The second thing is I have to kill my father. I have to transcend my culture of origin. Not that I abandon it, but I have to go beyond it. It only has partial truth. The third one is I got to kill my guru. There is no teacher who can take me all the way. And it's not about dishonoring them. I have to honor them, but realize that every single one of us is going to have experiences that even the guru didn't have. And the fourth thing is I have to murder God.
Greetings and a very special welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. I'm your host, Espen. Today I'm joined by Father Seán ÓLaoire. This is going to be a beautiful conversation about anything sacred, anything that has to do with returning home to source within whatever that looks like for us in this reality. We're going to talk faith, we're going to talk religion, but not from a place of, yes, religion is good or bad or right or wrong, but really as to how we can tune in to the creative spark that lives within and how we can walk an even more sacred path. Father Seán has shared sacred teachings of Christ in ways that I, for one, have tuned into with so much reverence and coherence, because it's not from the standard dogmatic perspective, but rather from such a sacred, intuitive place that really resonates with my soul. So I'm really honored to have Father Seán here. Father Seán ÓLaoire was born in Ireland, and he's got a bachelor with a major in mathematics from the National University of Ireland. He's an ordained Catholic priest from 1972, and he spent 14 years working and living in Kenya. He's a multilingual, which is exciting. Having the conversation about language is I think, an exciting conversation in general. He's a licensed clinical psychologist and also in private practice, and he's a co-founder and spiritual director of the non-denominational community called Companions of the Journey. How beautiful, which is in Palo Alto. He's published multiple books. I just mentioned before, as we jumped on this interview, Father Seán's interview on the Aubrey Marcus podcast, which I will link to the description below to this podcast, but that's definitely worth our time. So today we're going to talk about I would say the many aspects of divinity and how we can possibly tap into that to a whole new level and make our lives, even more sacred if that's possible. Father Seán, thank you so much for your time. How are you today, buddy?
A million thanks to you, my brother. It's lovely to put a face on you, Espen. Yeah, I've been looking at your story and it's amazing. And as I say, you guys, you podcasters, you are the light workers of our times. That's how the change is going to happen. It's not going to happen through big, mega churches or through political processes or economic changes or whatever. It's going to happen in small communities, being guided by the likes of yourself.
It's an honor. Thank you so much for that. And, we started this conversation just by smiling and laughing. So let's keep that energy flowing. I'm going to jump straight into it, Father. I want to ask this question. You walk this path of both the science and the sacred. What do you believe is the real spiritual technology that's hidden within the teachings of Christ that the church never revealed?
Right. So it's interesting to me that I've just given a 3-day seminar to my community, and the title I gave to it was, "What in God's Name is Christ Consciousness?" So I spent 7 lectures trying to tease that apart. And one of the things I realized many years ago is that the term Christ consciousness, my definition is this: I've been seeding my dreams. I started recording my dreams in 1979 when I was still living in Kenya. And I see them. Carl Jung had this technique where before you go to sleep at night, you drop an idea into your subconscious and say, give me a dream that might elucidate this. So I'm constantly looking for kind of pithy articulations of mystical kinds of things. So before I went to sleep a few months ago, I said, give me a pithy definition of Christ consciousness. And I woke up at 4:00 in the morning, and the message I got was, Christ consciousness is the permanent awareness of the inner divinity of all beings. So very, very subtly. So it is having the ability to recognize God in everything. And so there's this great, when we think in Christianity that Jesus is the Logos, And logos in Greek means just not just the word, but the kind of the morphological agent, that which gives shape to matter. And so basically, all matter is frozen light. We know that from quantum mechanics, that literally all matter is frozen light. So that's the stuff. And then the logos, or the word, or om, is what fashions the stuff into form. So it's a kind of a morphogenetic agent. And so that for me then is the function of the Christ. It is to form, to awake us to our divinity, our inner divinity. So Christ consciousness then is the permanent awareness of that realization, that everything I encounter, the oak trees outside my window, the bunny rabbits hopping around, the coyotes in the forest, they're all, they're the Word of God made flesh. So we think sometimes as Christians that, only Jesus was the Word of God made flesh. And I keep saying that everything is a Word of God made flesh. I keep saying that, life is a dream that the ego is having. And the ego is a dream that the soul is having. And the soul is a dream that spirit is having. And spirit is a dream that God is having. So we're God's dream. We live in nested dreams. And Christ consciousness is kind of unpacking the outer layers of our kind of self-identifications. So typically we identify with an ego, or with a physical structure, or with a job we're doing, or relationships we're in, or ideas we have. And we have to keep disidentifying with those until we re-identify with our core divinity. And when we do that, then we can say namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you. No matter whom I meet or what I meet, I have to recognize the divinity within. So I really believe that Christ consciousness, that our function as human beings is to give birth to God. We're not finished, our work on planet Earth until we give birth to God within ourselves, recognizing it in others, and creating a divine kind of systems in our world where we recognize each other as divine beings. So, and I find the same thing then in so many different systems. Buddhism will call it discovering our Buddha nature. Hinduism will call it, self-realization. So different systems have different words for it. But basically, Christ consciousness is literally about the recognition of the inner divinity of all beings and treating them accordingly. So that's what the churches don't get. The churches are trying to kind of isolate particular avatars as if they were separate from us, different from us, and unattainable, that we're meant to worship them. And Christ did not come to be worshipped. He came to be imitated. He was a prototype. He came to say, this is what you can do. No matter what circumstance you find yourself in, even hanging on a cross for 3 hours and being speared on the side, you can harvest even that for love and for forgiveness, and recognizing the inner divinity of the people who are, casting lots for his clothes, to possess his whatever he had. And even then, he could say, Father, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing. So even he could see the divinity that was lost in these people. And that, for me, that's what Christ consciousness is. It is to be able to harvest every situation in life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Your motorbike accident in Australia that turned your life around. You harvested this thing to become a self-healer, and therefore then to become a healer of other people. So that, for me, is that's the seeds of Christ consciousness. And that's often what the churches don't get. They're trying to substitute, the imitation of Christ for the veneration of Christ. So there's this great phrase at the beginning of John's Gospel. It's called the prologue to John's Gospel, where John says, in the beginning was the Word. And in Greek, it's written in Greek, so it's logos. And logos for me is the same as om in Sanskrit. So in the beginning was om, in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was the logos. And he says, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were created by him, and without him was made nothing that was made. In him was light, and this light was the life of human beings. And the light became flesh and dwelt among us. But Christians think that this only happened once, 2,000 years ago, with a carpenter from Nazareth. And I say it happens all the time, that everything that exists is a word of God made flesh. And so that recognition allows us to give the namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you. So for me, that's what Christ consciousness is about. And that was the function of Jesus. He did not come to be worshipped. He came to be imitated. He was the prototype and said, this is, how you can turn every event in your life, and harvest it for good. And he literally did it. Every event of his life, no matter whether he was preaching or, riding in the back of a donkey, or hanging on a cross, he could turn every single situation, and create a spiritual lesson out of it. So there's a great parable he tells one time. He's a master of paradox. And many of his parables are paradoxical. And in order to understand them, you have to listen not with your left brain, not even your right brain. You have to listen with your heart, and with your soul, not with your intellect. So at one stage he says, once upon a time there was a very rich man, and he had a steward who was in charge of all his property. And this guy was in charge of his property for years and years and years. And then at one stage, the master found out that his steward was embezzling his property. So he called him, he says, I need to see the books. I hear you've been embezzling. And so the guy thinks, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I'm too old to get a real job. I'm too kind of embarrassed to beg. What am I going to do? So he calls in all his master's debtors and he says, Espen, how much do you owe my master? And Espen says, 50 gallons of wine. And he says, here's your bill, change it to 30. Seán, how much do you owe the master? I owe 100 bushels of wheat. Here's your bill, make it 80. And then Christ said a very strange thing. He said, the master praised the unjust steward insofar as he had acted wisely, because the children of this world are more astute than the children of light. In other words, he wasn't praising this guy's duplicity. He was saying this guy could turn every situation to his own economic advantage. When he was, employed, he was creaming it off. But even when he got fired, he was bribing people so that when he got fired, he'd collect. And Christ saying, why can't you turn every situation to your own spiritual advantage? That's what it's about. And when I see the life of Christ, that's exactly what he did. Every situation he encountered, he could harvest it for spirituality and for compassion. So that for me is kind of the message of Christ consciousness. And the churches don't get that. They put him on a pedestal and say, you got to worship him because he's one of a kind. He's not. He's a prototype of the kind, but he's not one of a kind. We're all part of that kind.
Oh, this is so powerful, because this is, again, what I sense to be so true within my own being, that we can actually realize that we have similar capacities. And I'm not saying we're walking on water tomorrow. I'm saying we have God within. We have the divine within, and we can begin to live and to lead by example. I think that's what he was, an example. And so I want to ask, we have then, let's be clear, not we, the churches or organized religion in different ways seem to have externalized something. There's a man coming back, and we have to wait until that happens. And when that happens, we will be saved. But there is a different hypothesis, which is he came to show the way, and he is within. I mean, he said this over and over and over again. And I just wonder then, is this the way? Are we supposed to turn the light within and realize that we can begin to live in a similar way, and as such attune closer to the divine? Or what are your thoughts?
You're absolutely 100% right. Because it's like the job of any parent, if you're the father of a child, your job is to raise a child who will be independent of you and will go out into the world and make his way in the world. Your job is not to create somebody who's going to hang on to you for the rest of his life and live in your basement at least 60. And so I believe that religion is the training wheels for spirituality. And when you get the message, you can let go of the religion. Now, the good part of religion is that it gets us the opportunity to create communities, and we need communities of various kinds, but not mega communities of 1.5 billion members. We don't need that. We need small communities. We know sociologically that if a community has less than 150 members, everybody in the community can know everybody else in the community. So you got a real community, people who know each other and are there for each other. If it goes over 150 people, it's much more difficult. And certainly if you got 1.5 billion people in a Catholic church community, it's not a community anymore. So what it is, it's a big organization. And so we need to realize that we have needs for community. And we even have needs for liturgy, because liturgy should be a way of altering our state of consciousness. Good liturgy, whether it's music, our readings, our incense, our stained glass windows, whatever it is, it shifts our state of consciousness. And as we shift our state of consciousness, we get nearer and nearer and nearer to our soul self. And that should be the function of a community, to provide good ritual or good liturgy, and to provide us the opportunity of doing two things. A community should support me in my search for truth, and it should challenge me in my personal cosmology right now. And I should do the same thing for my community. So it's bilateral. I should challenge my community in its belief systems, and at the same time, I should encourage it to keep searching. So when we realize that, then we can let go of these kind of mega churches and kind of band together in small groups where we all know each other, and we can kind of support each other and inspire each other. And so the time of the mega churches is long since gone. And Christ was constantly, forming little communities as he kind of traveled around, forming communities in different villages and expecting that they would support each other subsequently. And we know from early Christian history that there were literally hundreds of those small communities. It was only with when the Roman Empire, made the Christian church the state religion in the year 312, so like 300 years after Jesus, then everything went to hell. Now it becomes a mega church, and it becomes an organization, it becomes a political entity. And now there's no more anymore for the small communities, every one of whom knows each other and supports each other.
Beautiful. So I thought within that as how can we potentially form our own or be a part of a community where we are aligned with the visions and the hypothesis and the belief and the philosophy of that community. Is that something that we could lean into? What are your thoughts on that? If someone says, "Great, I would love to be a part," where do I start?
Yeah, you put your finger right on it. And so I'm fascinated by the Hindu notion of body. In the West, we seem to think that the body is just this physical organism with a bunch of internal organs, but other traditions had very different models. Like Egyptians believed in two versions of the body, Ka and Ba. Ka was the spiritual body and Ba was the physical body. The Greeks had three words for it. It was sarx, soma, and pneuma. So sarx was this flesh and blood stuff, and soma was the kind of the somatic body, and pneuma was the spirit body. But Hinduism had 7 different levels. So you start off with a physical body, which is vibrating between infrared and ultraviolet, between 400 and 700 nanometers. Yeah, it's the physical body. Then you've got the etheric body, which is the elan vital that you activated for your own personal healing. So which is the energy template of which the physical body is a printout. And you changed that printout. You did yourself. The third body is the astral body. It's the place of our emotions, and it's also the place where we go in our dreams. And so when you get to the emotional body, there's neither time nor space. So I can dream about my grandfather who died in 1956, and I can visit with him in my home in Ireland, which is 6,000 miles to the east of where I live and 70 years into the past. But in my dream, he's there because there's neither time nor space at the astral level. Then we go to the mental level, and we're in Plato's ideal realm, the place of the archetypes, the ideal forms. And then the next level is the psychic body, where we have all these abilities, psychic abilities, the siddhis, as Hinduism will call them. So clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, psychokinesis, precognition, all these things, they're all part of our kind of our equipment. And then the next level up is the soul self, and then ultimately there is source itself. Now, our job, I believe, even during incarnation, is to constantly disidentify with lesser versions of the self until we finally identify with the soul self and then finally merge into God. Buddhism has a lovely phrase for this. They call it Turiyatita. So Turiya is the witnessing consciousness that can observe Seán, incarnated and doing his shtick, but not identify with Seán. And the character I'm playing, I don't identify with that. I know this is just a kind of I'm going to throw this off in a few years, and then go back to who I really am, to my soul self. And so the idea of Turiyatita is that there's what cultural anthropology will call participant observer. There's the participant in the village, taking notes of what's happening in the village, some kind of, an outsider who's come in to kind of take notes what the natives are doing. But his very presence is already affecting the village. So he's a participant whether he realizes it or not. So the job then is to be a participant observer, but not to identify with the participation, to identify with the fact that I'm a soul being. I'm a bite-sized piece of God who volunteered for incarnation, and that we form communities then of like-minded people, all of whom are striving to activate the soul self in themselves and in others.
We're not going to, but we could just end it there. That is phenomenal. I for one will be pressing repeat, listen over and over again.
Okay.
This is so special. I'm honored, and it feels there's such a breath of fresh air, Seán, to be able to have a conversation like this outside the realms of dogma. Yeah, and and we'll come back to the whole breathing side of things, but I want to mention I sat with, so I was a yoga teacher, right? And so I learned to, I looked through the Bhagavad Gita and I practiced yoga and I moved my body and I sat with the breath. And then I thought, oh, hang on, but I also identify with Christ and, the whole word Christian. I didn't feel really that I fit in from a religious perspective, but it's like Christ is in me and this beautiful light is who I am. But what if am I being, disrespectful or doing the wrong thing if I was to say the word om, I will use the vibration om. And then I would travel to other teachings and I'll sit in plant medicine ceremonies and I would call it wakantanka,
Yes.
tunkashila, like the breath of spirit. And you know what? And over the years, I just had to let go of the dogma and I had to come home to my belief, which is God is, and the breath of God is in everything, and it takes different form in different religions and cultures, and so I practice syncretism. I would take the wisdom of the chakra system and practice that, and I would take the Christ consciousness, and I would embody the belief and trying to walk as close to that path as possible. But I would also take different things from culture, traditions, and religions around the world and synthesize it into what worked for me. I'd love to know your thoughts on that so that we can finally let go of the whole, what is it, 4,000 something religions and I'm doing it right and you're doing it wrong. Can we just drop that? Can we just come home? Tell us a little bit about your hypothesis on that.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Espen. So, as a child, I was raised bilingually in Gaelic and in English, and I had a grandfather who was kind of almost like a druid, who taught me all the ancient Irish druidical storytelling. And I had a great grandmother who was like a Christian mystic. So I got both sides of it. But I was always fascinated by stories, and particularly by proverbs. And so at one stage, I spent the summer holidays when I was in high school in parts of Ireland where Gaelic is still the mother tongue. And I was collecting proverbs. In Gaelic, we call them seanochel. And seanochel literally means ancient words. And I'd go around to the elders in a village and say, give me a seanochel and tell me in what context you would use it. So I collected 432 proverbs in the course of the summer. But one old man said to me, he said, if Christianity had never come to Ireland, we could live according to the proverbs. And he was absolutely right. And when I was a missionary priest in Kenya, and I was dipping into 4 different languages and mythologies, I would say to the people, if Christianity had never come to Africa, you guys could live according to the Proverbs. Because for me, stories are the archived wisdom of a culture. That's where it archives its wisdom. And Proverbs are the one-line distillations of that. And so there is no culture on planet Earth whom God has not addressed. And if you want to find out how God has spoken to any culture, look at their stories and their mythology. So I coined a word years ago. I called it mythish. And mythish is the sacred wisdom embedded in the stories of a culture. And whether it's East Africa or the Mesoamerica, or Asia, or the Aboriginals of South America, or the shamans and the Lakota people with Wakantanka, that all these traditions have the embedded, wisdom, and they're sharing it in story form. Because if you try to articulate a deep wisdom in theological language or philosophical language or scientific language, it's gonna rot. It's like putting your food into a refrigerator that's not plugged in. The food is going to rot in the refrigerator. So stories are the only way that you can archive the wisdom, and that each generation kind of exegete it, unpack it for its relevance for their times. And so that becomes the beauty then, that there are gems to be found in every tradition. And our job then is to find where they are and create this kind of cosmic jigsaw puzzle, taking pieces from all the different traditions and assembling the cosmological jigsaw puzzle that God gave to planet Earth right now.
Ooh, exactly. Thank you for saying what I said in a much more eloquent way. Get it. I get it. And that's exactly what I felt. You brought up the different bodies,
Yes.
the
Yes.
mental body, the
Yes.
etheric body, the pranic body. And I want to talk a little bit about this because I had an experience, right? So I was working as a physician in Australia. I retired, exited 2016, and I thought, I was overworked, burnt out, and I wanted to find myself, quote unquote, was my quest at the time. And so I went into the Peruvian jungle. I fasted for 30 days.
Wow.
And yeah, 30 days. And I
Wow.
had an experience with plant medicine for the first time. Not that this is, to be recommended or whatever, but it's been a beautiful part of my life. The point being, after sitting still, not being busy, fasting, praying, trying to come home and remember and put together the pieces, I had a vision. And the vision showed me an array of colors. And I've never seen colors like this before. And this was not in a ceremony. This was many days after. And it showed me the red and the orange and the yellow and the green and this beautiful chakra system. And he showed me that I had some issues with the blue one. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. I don't, so I looked into it, and it was about self-expression and about truth and so on and so forth. And so I had to reflect, and I realized there was a part of me that was certainly suppressed. I had subordinated, I hadn't spoken my truth, I hadn't lived my truth. I tried to fit into a box where I wasn't really me, and the energy wasn't flowing. And then as I researched more into it, I found in the ancient Vedic system, there are certain primary emotions, lower frequency emotions primarily, that block the flow of life force through this specific system. Fear blocks the root center, guilt blocks the sacral center, lack of self-worth and shame blocks the third one, grief blocks the heart, lies block the throat, and so on. And so I thought this is useful, because today I think a lot of people are living in a somewhat of a suppressed nature. So I developed a curriculum that would enable us to collapse the fear and turn the fear into fuel, and then the guilt into gratitude, and the shame into self-worth, and the grief into love and gratitude, and so on. So I kind of take people through this journey of, from the lower states to the higher states, and I try to do it in a way where they can ask themselves a series of questions. And we do a lot of body work, a lot of movement, a lot of breath. I want to ask, from something like that, what comes through for you when we're talking about that, when we're talking to a father in regards to the chakra system, in regards to similar processes? What are your thoughts?
I think what you just articulated is really, really powerful, Espen. I hope you've promulgated that and it's available for people online, or in workshops or whatever. You've given the best synthesis of the chakra system, the blockages, and the freeing of them that I've ever heard. It's like a 2-minute dissertation on how to set the person free at every single level. That's really, really beautiful. I hope you're putting that out there, because it's so practical and it really nails it. So I love exactly what you said. And so obviously I believe then that that this model of body that the Hindus came up with is really, really beautiful. And I see even in the kind of the crucified Christ, very, very often the points that were bleeding are the kind of the chakra points on his physical body. And that some senses, even in his dying, is like he's pouring love through the chakras, in various forms. So I also have a belief system that I think that same system of 7 levels of body, I think Gaia herself has it. So I think that the first level of Gaia is what I call the physiosphere, the rock, the third rock from the sun in this particular solar system. It's a rock. And so we study that using physics. And then at some stage, it created an atmosphere around this rock. And for me, the atmosphere is the womb of the planet. I had a vision one time where I saw souls volunteering in front of God. And this great soul called Gaia volunteered and said to God, send me to that third rock from the sun in that solar system, and I'll create life until I throw up a life form capable of recognizing its own divinity and ipso facto the divinity of all other beings. So the first stage she did was create a womb for herself, and we call that the biosphere. Yeah, we call this the kind of the atmosphere, and that's studied by chemistry perhaps. And then life emerged. And so now you have the third sheath is the biosphere, fauna, flora, and then fauna, And then the fourth stage is what Tyler de Chardin called the noosphere, the sheath of consciousness that surrounds the biosphere. And the movement, we're moving from biosphere to noosphere. And that's a very, very dangerous transition. Because, we're now developing an internet, the possibility of artificial intelligence, the possibility of transhumanism. And so now we're going to either destroy the human species or destroy the planet itself in a nuclear holocaust. So we're in that stage in between 3 and 4. But there are 3 more stages beyond that, I believe. The next stage is, I call it the anima sphere. Anima being the Latin word for the soul sphere. That Gaia herself has a soul. And at some stage, we'll merge into the soul of the planet itself. And then the next is when I call it the pneuma sphere. Pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. And now we're almost at we're at the antechamber to the divine. and then finally the cosmosphere where we merge with source again. So I think Gaia herself is pacing us in this movement. It's not just that human beings are evolving, we are, but that it's like in a race, in a marathon, there are pacers who set out ahead of us to kind of increase the pace of the race. And Gaia is doing that for us. She's pacing us in this journey because we're going to arrive at the end line at the same time. The human species is going to morph into what I call Homo Christus, or Homo Mysticus. And at the same time, the planet itself is going to elevate into its soul self, And for me, that's what the light workers are about. The light workers are like doulas and midwives and doctors who are kind of attending the pregnant mother to give birth to this new form of Homo sapiens sapiens.
Oh. Hmm. 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 There's so much here, Father. I'm just going to review over and over again. This is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Which Bible do you follow? Are we talking King James? How do you read the Bible? Is it metaphorically? How do you avoid the manipulation of the scriptures, the sacred text that was changed? How do you come to the real sacred text?
So I think that in listening to any story, whether it's the mythology of East Africa or the folklore of Ireland or kind of the indigenous plant medicine of Mesoamerica or the scriptures of the Upanishads or the Pithics of Buddhism, that there are three different ways of listening to it. The first one's a literal mindset, where we're operating from our physical brain, from our left brain, rational thinking, and trying to unpack it literally, and that doesn't work. The next way is doing it symbolically, using the right brain, kind of creativity. But the ultimate way to address the scriptures is kind of through mysticism, that the only way to unpack the scriptures is in a mystical way. Now, mysticism then is the difference between wisdom and knowledge. So knowledge is data that are generated by the sensorium and processed by the physical brain. Wisdom is data that are generated by the soul and processed by the heart. So when we encounter a scriptural tradition of any, whether it's an oral tradition in East Africa or a kind of a written tradition in India, we have to approach it with a mystical mindset and realize that literalism is going to get us into big, big trouble, But embedded within the stories is this deep, deep wisdom. And if you throw out the kind of the source, you're throwing out the possibility of interpreting it mystically as well. So you have to cherish the sources, but then deal with them at a heart level and a soul level, not just at a kind of a physical level. So this is the reason Christ refused to speak in theological terminology or philosophical concepts or kind of scientific language. He was asked one time, "Why are you always speaking in stories? Talk to us plainly." And he said, "I speak in parables so that seeing you may see, but not understand. Hearing you may hear, but not comprehend." Now, why would any teacher speak in such a way that we can hear it, but not understand it, see it, but not comprehend it? Because he's saying is, if you're listening to me with your left brain, or your head, you're not going to get it. And you learn to listen with your heart and with your soul. These words are just, they won't help you in the least. So when Christ is addressing any audience, I think he's looking at his audience. He knows, okay, this guy really gets it. This guy doesn't get it. This guy's a literalist. So you take a Buddha figure. A Buddha's walking along the road and he picks a flower and he holds it aloft. And everybody's saying, "Okay, dude, what are you going to say about the flower?" He's just holding it there and they wait for 5 minutes and he never says anything. And they say, "All right, dude, what's up with the flower?" And then finally, one of the disciples breaks into this big grin, just as you did. And the Buddha smiled and said, "You got it." Because if you really see a flower, you see everything. Thich Nhat Hanh would say, a flower consists totally of non-flower elements. If you took the sun away and the water away and the kind of the soil away and the wind away, there wouldn't be a flower. So to see a flower is to see everything. So what I say then is that it's not important where you look, it's important how you look. You can look everywhere and find nothing if you don't know how to look. If you do know how to look, it doesn't matter where you look, you'll find everything. Because everything is contained, we're holographic fractals of God. And a hologram is an entity that contains the totality of itself in every one of its component parts. And a fractal is a pattern that repeats at an infinite number of scales. So we're holographic fractals of source. So it doesn't matter whether I'm looking at a lily or a budding rabbit or an oak tree or a human being. If I really know how to look, I'm looking at God. And so that's the scriptures. It's looking at the scriptures in such a way that I let go of the literalism and even the symbology, and I'm looking at a mystical level. I know how to look in such a way that even the scriptures, no matter how badly they've been kind of mistranslated, I can still see through the ultimate core of what Christ had in mind.
Beautiful. Absolutely. I want to ask you a question, and I want to see how, and I want you to just come from, as you do, speak your truth, because there was, again, for a period of time, an aspect of me that was in judgment and guilt towards myself regarding this next topic that I'll bring up. I have transcended that, and I have learned to work with this in a beautiful way, and it's been very healing for me. But again, from your perspective, I have, as I studied the scriptures, different scriptures, including the Bible, I've looked into the aspect of the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail not necessarily being something external. And then I came across some research. It's referred to mostly as the sacred secret, the milk and honey. And for me, it looked like it had a lot of symbology with the Kundalini energy that the yogis speak of, that there is life force energy. A lot of it in this human experience supposedly slowed down a lot in frequency, obviously, obtained in the three lower energy centers. The Kundalini energy obviously speaks of how this serpent of life force can move its way into the brain. And the way it's said there's 33 vertebrae in the spine, 33 years of Christ. Heel is hell, heathed up is heaven and head. And so there is the hypothesis, let's just call it that for now, that if and when you were able to move from the lower states of consciousness, symbolizing where most people operate mentally and emotionally within the three lower centers of human survival and somewhat the animal passions and so on, if we were to move that energy up and open the heart space, we could, dissolve space and time, because the heart is beyond space and time. And if we do, with breath specifically, and this comes through fasting and other things, we could move enough energy into the brain, and the milk and the honey is the pineal pituitary. And when we activate the pineal pituitary circuit, we could secrete DMT from the pineal gland, and we can have an out-of-body mystical type experience. So within this sacred secret, there's also that of, some say that it was symbolic, that, again, speaking in parables, this was about the inner Christ and the inner awakening, and that this, like I said, moving of the energy from the lower to the higher and activating, illuminating the mind, enlightenment to bring light to the mind, illuminate the mind, has to do with the sacred secret. And the milk and honey is the masculine, feminine, the Ida, the Pingala, that divine unity, which can be part of the Holy Trinity. So I just wanted to share that. Have you got any thoughts on that? Have you done any research, heard anything similar?
I think it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful, Espen, absolutely. So one of the things I say is that there is no place where God is not, and there is no idea that you cannot harvest for mystical insight. I love that notion of the Ida and the Pingala rising up through it. And what I say is that there is nothing about being human which should be shameful. So not even the three lower chakras, that it's important for us that we're incarnated beings and that we learn to honor those as well. But that we don't identify with them, that we continue to kind of utilize them when it's appropriate, at the same time move into the higher centers. And so I'm sure in Hinduism that they talk about like 4 different eras of reincarnation. That the first group of incarnations is about, we're kind of interested in sensual pleasure, because it's our first time incarnating and we're fascinated by sexuality or by good food or whatever. And that's beautiful. That's our first kind of taste of incarnation. But after many, many kind of reincarnations, when just indulging just our sensuality, we come to this place where we begin to realize that the second group of incarnations are about power, privilege, and prestige, the ability to kind of have power in situations. And Hinduism would say again, and there's nothing wrong with that, if you exercise power really well. It's not power over people, it's self-power, it's self-empowerment. And so now you're a central person still, but it's less important to you than kind of your own personal inner power. And then the third stage, they call compassion, that you're in service to others. The third group of incarnations where you realize that everybody else is a child of God and you're in service to other people. But they said that even that isn't the final stage, because that's still predicated on the notion of separation. I can't be of service to you or compassionate to you if I regard you as other to me. And so when I see that you're just another version of me, that's very different. And so the fourth series of incarnations then is moksha, total liberation from the notion that I'm confined to the spacesuit and identified with any of the chakras. And so the movement then for me of the Kundalini is the invitation to sequentially identify with higher and higher levels of the self until I finally identify with my own inner divinity, but without dishonoring any of the previous stages. And so it's not that, I eschew the others and kind of regard them as kind of less than spiritual. You can spiritualize everything. Everything can be spiritualized, and so for me, it's the realization that I can experience all of these levels, but more and more I'm identifying with the higher levels of the self until finally I realize that I'm a bite-sized piece of God, as is everybody else. And then whatever kind of techniques have been created by these great wisdom traditions like Hinduism, like the Kundalini experience, like working with the chakras, like plant medicine, like Eucharistic encounters, that all these have been tried and trusted ways of altering my state of consciousness until finally I identify with my core self, my God self, and I recognize the God self in everybody else, but never dishonoring any other part of the journey.
I love that. Back to Joshua and to this conversation. If Jesus was alive today, what would he say about institutionalized religion? And would he still call himself a Christian? What are your thoughts on
Okay, no, I don't believe.
That's a
I
good
don't
question.
believe. I don't believe that Christ set up a church. I do not believe he set up a church. I
Uh-huh.
think he came to challenge the kind of the religion of his own time and his own people, And I really think that I sometimes think that I look at there's in the Catholic system there are decades of the Rosary, the mysteries in the life of Christ, and there's a group called the joyful mysteries of the Rosary, and the first one is the Annunciation. The next is the Visitation. The third is the Nativity. The third one is the Presentation of the Temple. And the fifth one is the Finding the Temple. So let me walk through them very, very, very quickly. The first one is called the Visitation, where Mary has an encounter with the angel Gabriel, and she's invited to become the Mother of God. Now, this is not a unique thing. Every single one of us is invited to be the Mother of God. Meister Eckhart said very famously in the 1300s, of what use to me is it that my Savior was born of a virgin 1300 years ago. If he's not born again in my heart and in my time, every single one of us is meant to be the Mother of God. So Mary is getting this invitation to be the Mother of God, but it's not a unique kind of invitation. But she said yes, knowing exactly what it would involve, for her. So that's the Visitation. The second one was kind of, that was the Annunciation by Gabriel. The second one is the Visitation, where she visits her cousin Elizabeth, who's an elderly woman who's way beyond menopause, but she finds herself pregnant with the future John the Baptist. And when the two of them meet, the two babies jump in utero. It's like they recognize each other, that even as in utero, the two of them recognize the divinity in their mothers. And the mothers are not just greeting each other as Christ carriers or divine vehicles. They're recognizing that you, Mary, are a divine being, and I, Elizabeth, am a divine being. So the Visitation, I would call it the Christian Namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you. Yeah. The third one is the birth of Christ. So now Mary, who was kind of conceived in her heart and has agreed to be part of this new cohort, is literally giving birth to a baby who will carry this message forward. Now, and each one of us is meant to do that. The fourth one is the Presentation in the Temple, where at age 8 days, every Jewish boy had to be kind of offered in the temple. And they had to give an offering of a turtle dove or 2 pigeons, or if they were wealthy, a young lamb. You kind of redeem the child back from God, because the belief system was that only God can open the womb, and therefore the firstborn belongs to God. You can keep the subsequent children, but initially they would have to sacrifice the firstborn, literally sacrifice the firstborn, because it belonged to God. But now they could trade, and you could redeem the firstborn with a lamb. And so now they bring the child into the temple, and they're kind of kind of initiating the child into their wisdom tradition of Judaism, which is really important. Every child has to be initiated into a wisdom tradition. But then at age 12, Jesus is lost in the temple and he's talking to the wise men. So what is he doing? Now Christ is transcending his own wisdom tradition because he realizes that every wisdom tradition has a piece of the truth. And now I believe he's going to spend time, in Egypt, in India, in Tibet, in Persia, learning all of the other wisdom traditions.
And he
So
did,
that when he
didn't he?
comes,
Didn't he
yeah,
travel around to all these places? Can you tell us a
I
little bit
believe
about
he
that?
did. I believe he spent 18 years
Yeah,
visiting all of these other wisdom traditions
yeah.
because he realized that no one wisdom tradition has all of the wisdom. So he learned something from Hinduism. He learned from Buddhism. He learned from Zoroastrianism. He learned from the mystery schools of Egypt. And now at age 30, he comes back and he's cross-fertilized all these wisdom traditions. And that's what each one of us has to do. I say to be a truly deeply spiritual person, you have to commit 4 murders. And I mean facetious. The first thing is I have to murder my ego. It's not that I get rid of it, but that I realize, my ego is not myself. My ego is just the CEO of a particular state of consciousness. But I have to murder it and knock it into second position. The second thing is I have to kill my father. I have to transcend my culture of origin. Not that I abandon it, but I have to go beyond it. It only has partial truth. The third one is I got to kill my guru. There is no teacher who can take me all the way. And it's not about dishonoring them. I have to honor them, but realize that every single one of us is going to have experiences that even the guru didn't have. And the fourth thing is I have to murder God. This theological concept that we've created, in our cosmologies. We have to murder that and realize that, Meister Eckhart would say again, I pray daily to God to rid me of God. And Buddhism would say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And so you can't mistake, Hinduism would call it Parabrahma. So there's a place beyond Brahma, and that's Parabrahma. And Parabrahma is utterly ineffable and inarticulatable. You can't say anything about it. You can experience it, but you can't articulate it. And the very same thing then, I think the transcendence of God versus the immanence of God. Of the transcendence of God, we can say nothing except neti neti. No, not this. No, not that. And it's like we have to back ourselves into the experience by kind of working our way out of the intelligence. And that's what Zen koans do by asking us ridiculous questions that can't be solved intellectually, so that we were backed out of the intellect and into the experience, the ineffability of Source. So for me then, this is the quest of Christ consciousness. It is about constantly kind of cross-fertilizing wisdom traditions, so that I get to the core and I just kind of get rid of the unimportant pieces, the kind of the religious kind of hang-ons of these pieces, until I get to the core, that I find all spiritualities are saying the very same thing when I get to that part.
It's exactly what I've been trying to synthesize over these years. Amazing. Let's talk breath. I'll share a couple of scriptures from the Bible. First, my own story. So we briefly talked about this before we started recording, and I was blessed to have a motorcycle accident. I broke my legs, and got the infection from hospital, the staph infection. And the surgeon says, "Hey, we have to take your leg, and then we can stop the infection. And if we don't do that, you're going to die." It's the first time in my life, Sean, I felt disconnected until that moment, and Spirit came through me and said, "Go home and breathe." And it was a moment of I had at that point never felt like that before. I was living in fear for a year and 2 months, and when that came through, the Spirit and God came through, it was literally a moment of just transcendence. It was no fear. It was just I was home, and I felt safe. I felt, yeah, great. I'm good. I can do this. And so I left the hospital. I did literally, he said, "We have to take your leg." I said, "No, thanks." I left the hospital. I went home, and I was instructed to breathe. I was guided to breathe. Now, I had a little bit of experience in breath because of my practice of yoga and qigong and so on, but extremely limited. Nothing compared to what we now know about breath. I sat up on my bed, and it was in, and it was out, and it was in, and it was out, and it was in, and it was out, and it was just Yahweh. It was masculine, feminine. It was doing, non-doing. It was darkness and light, and it was everything at once, and it was everything as me. And I passed out, and I woke up, and I was like, I had the biggest smile on my face because I felt so good. And I thought, I don't know what that was, but I'll do it again. So I did it again, and I did it again. And the thing is, I had a hole, like literally a hole in my skin on the side of my hip. I've still got a big scar. And the hole for about a year and 2 months would get bigger or smaller. It would get bigger when I was unhealthy. If I was
Okay.
stressed and not
Okay.
sleeping properly, and if I would eat
Okay.
unhealthy, it would get bigger and get worse. And if I was to meditate and take care of myself and be clean eating and get rest and not stress, it would get smaller. So I had an inkling as to what was working,
Oh,
quote
oh,
unquote, what was helping. The day after I woke up from the breath, it had shrunk so much. I had never seen that before. And so truth bumps come through me and said, okay, this is good. This is working. My mind was going, oh, thank you. Because, right? Because spirit came through and said, go home and breathe. And my mind was, yeah, thanks, spirit. Could you give me something a little bit more useful? I've been breathing my whole life. Okay. Give me something I can work with. Yeah. But my heart said, trust in the spirit
oh,
of breath.
no.
And I had no idea. So I just thought, well, I've done everything else, so I'm just going to breathe, right? And then I woke up and I felt so great. And so I did it again and I did it again. And I had the infection for a year and 2 months. And in 3.5 weeks, I healed myself through breath. And it was guided from something much greater, at least than my own state of consciousness at the time. And I've been sharing it ever since. So I want to share a couple of scriptures from the Bible, and I'd love to hear your hypothesis and belief and your teachings around breath. So the first one is from Genesis 2:7. It says, "Then the Lord formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." In Ezekiel 37:5, this is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones: I will make breath enter you, and you will become life. And the last one I'll share is John 20:22. And with that, he breathed on them and said, receive the Holy Spirit. My whole body is truth bumping as I share this. Is God in the breath? Obviously God is everywhere, but I want you to tell us a little bit about what do you feel, what do you know about this thing that we call breathing?
That is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, Espen. I'm 100% behind you. Because in so many different languages, the single word does triple duty. So breath, like in Swahili, we call it pepo. In Sanskrit, it's prana. In Greek, it's pneuma. In Hebrew, it's ruach. And they all have the very same notion that somehow breath and life and spirit are synonyms. That in some sense, where you have one, you have the others as well. Where there's breath, there's life. So when you see somebody expire, literally the last thing they do, they let go of their breath. So literally they're sending their spirit back home. And so I really believe that the breath is the energizing principle of the flesh itself. So when I look at how kind of creation comes together, initially there is light, and light creates all of matter. And then there is so first there is love. God is love. And then I believe that love has twins. I call them light and logos. And so the love that is God, love is not just an attribute of God. Love is a synonym. God is love, not God has love or has a characteristic. Sometimes he's loving and sometimes he's not. God is love. They're synonyms. But it bifurcates, and the two legs of it are kind of light and logos. So light then creates physical matter, but it's kind of, in some sense, it is dead matter. And then logos is the animating principle. And so logos then are om. Om then, as you vibrate it, you're literally breathing life into matter. You're molding form from it. And then the spirit, when light merge, when they dance together, life is the spirit. And then laughter is the result. That the ultimate kind of a sign that you have spirit in you is that you're laughing, because laughter is the first sign of enlightenment. It's the realization that we're living in this kind of a made-up world where we identify with our physicality. And so laughter for me then is the realization that there is only God, and that we're living, incarnated beings, because we volunteered to kind of inhabit three-dimensional spacesuits. And the only thing that animates a three-dimensional spacesuit is the breath, or the life, or the spirit. And so for me, they're synonyms. And in so many different languages, when you say the word, it can have three totally different meanings. It can mean spirit, it can mean breath, and it can mean life. So I'm amazed that you were told this, the spirit was kind of speaking kind of bilingually for you, because it was giving you a message in your mind, and it was giving you the breath in your lungs and telling you this is the healing modality. This is how you heal yourself. This is how you reactivate the spirit in you that had been kind of shocked temporarily out of part of your body, the part that wasn't healing. It's like spirit was shocked out of that area, and you had to learn to breathe back into it to reintroduce spirit into that kind of decaying flesh, or that kind of part of you that wasn't in sync with your life purpose. So I love what you're saying. I love that. And I'm sure you know the other great passage about the dried bones, the valley of the dried bones, where the ultimate part of it is, firstly, God is kind of knitting the bones together, and then he's creating flesh all over them. And then the final thing is he breathed life into them, and then they stand up and they come alive again. Because breath is the animating principle, that which gives a kind of movement to mere matter.
Wow. Makes sense. And we're seeing miracles when people are breathing, not just in our rooms, but across the board. Wim Hof has shown this scientifically. The ancient yogis were teaching this thousands and thousands of years ago. I think it's really a great time where the primary element of healing, which is breath, is returning. We can't go as long without air as we can without water and food, that's for sure.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about Christ's frequency?
Okay.
We talk about Christ consciousness. Is this something that, we talked about the unity with everything, everyone, all the time. You spoke so beautifully about this earlier. Is there a unique frequency of Christ consciousness, or is it a frequency within us that is attainable also?
I think it's attainable for all of us, but it's Christ consciousness. And so I think that, that as we're waking up, kind of the various stages of human evolution. So we're now at Homo sapiens sapiens. The next stage, I believe, is Homo spiritualis. Then the next level is Homo mysticus. And then the next level is Homo Christus. So Homo spiritualis for me are people who make occasional kinds of sorties or forays into Christ consciousness. And then Homo mysticus are people who make regular forays into Christ consciousness. And then obviously Christ consciousness itself is the permanent alignment with that stage. And so we can learn how to do it. It's our birthright. Every single one of us, it's our birthright. And there are practices that can help that. So it's not unique to Christ. Christ is saying, this is what is possible for everybody. And so in John's gospel, again, he makes this statement, he says, the same things I've done, you will do, and even greater, because I go and I send the Father. Now, how could we possibly do greater things than Christ? For the simple reason that we're in much deeper doo-doo than even people were in Christ's time. Literally, there's the possibility of a global disaster. There wasn't that in the time of Christ. There was possibility of local disasters or colonial disasters, that the Roman Empire could dominate a group of people, or Genghis Khan later could do it. But there wasn't a possibility of literally a global Holocaust. There is now. And so the same things Christ did, and even greater. It needs to be greater because we're dealing with a greater issue. And the Christ consciousness of our times must be kind of ramped up a little bit. So it must be a global response to a global problem. And that means individual people, light workers, and individual communities all over the world becoming light workers and banding together and becoming like neurons on a kind of a global brain where we kind of interface with each other. We're independent of each other, so there's not this huge big hierarchical model dominated over by an individual like a pope or a patriarchal figure, but that we're networking with each other, and that it's the aspiration to become permanently Christ consciousness. That's what's going to change the equation for us. And we have to do that, person at a time. And you're doing it through your breath work. You're doing it through plant medicine. You're doing it through kind of meditation practices. And so there are many, many techniques that allow us to kind of have occasional experiences of Christ consciousness until finally they become more and more frequent, until finally it's kind of our resident mindset. And that's the frequency then, because ultimately as we ascend, Science studies four areas: space, time, energy, and matter. But space and time are artifacts of our physicality. And when we're dreaming at night, there's neither space nor time. And if you learn how to dream lucidly, one of the tests of lucid dreaming is I'm dreaming and I think, oh my God, I think I might be dreaming. The test is put my hand against a solid object and push. If my hand goes through it, I'm dreaming. If my hand doesn't go through it, I'm not dreaming. I think I'm dreaming, but I'm actually in a waking state. And so what that tells me is that when I'm dreaming, there's neither space, time, nor even matter. All that exists is some kind of energy. And energy is about different frequencies. And beings, when they identify with their own inner frequency, they want to hang out with other beings who are vibrating at the same frequency. And so when I think of heaven and hell, I don't think of them as geographical locations. I think of them as frequencies, and people want to be around the same frequency. Birds of a feather flock together. And so people who are having hellish experiences, it's because it's not that they're being kind of condemned to hell by God. God condemns nobody, but people who have lived in a particular kind of frequency, that's the frequency they recognize, that's the frequency they're comfortable around, and that's the frequency they're attracted toward. They want to be around other people who are vibrating the same frequency until they, over time, graduate from that frequency and are capable of attaining higher and higher frequencies. But Christed beings then are kind of comfortable with a totally different kind of frequency, with the Christ frequency. And it's not that they feel superior, it's that that's their comfort zone. And that's where they want to be, and they can continue to journey into ultimately union with Source itself. So the frequency then is the identifying mark of where my comfort level is, and at what stage, I want to find myself when I kind of shuffle off this mortal coil. So it's hugely important. They're my homies, they're my tribe, the people of the same frequency. And it's not an inferiority, superiority complex whatsoever. It's just, where the continued growing is going to happen. I'm at this particular frequency. There's no point in going backwards. I want to continue to grow. And so I identify what the frequency is, where I tend to hang out, and I want to move from there into higher and higher versions of that.
This is such a breath of fresh air. Pardon the pun. Oh, it's an honor. There are a few more questions, but I just want to drop this in there now. There are people now listening to this. I know, because I know my tribe and our community, and they are excited, really excited to learn more. Just mention, please, Father, a couple of your books, a couple of the places where they can go to consume more of this content.
Okay. So I think one of the gifts I have, and I want to say something about gifts, because we come into incarnation bearing two kinds of gifts. The first ones are our talents, but they don't belong to us. I'm like a mailman with a bag of letters. The letters in my bag do not belong to me. They belong to the people whose names are on the envelopes, and my job is to deliver them. So the first kind of gift is my talent set. So nobody can be proud about their talents. They can say, okay, I have a job to do. Here are the letters I was given to deliver. The letters do not belong to me. The talents do not belong to me. I got to deliver them to a community or whatever. The second kind of gifts I come in with are my problems, the areas in which I need to stretch and grow. And they're my gift to myself. But very typically, I tend to hog my talents and think they belong to me, and I think I project my problems onto somebody else and say, that's his fault, he's making me angry or whatever. And so the truth is, the problems belong to me and the talents do not. And so I have to kind of give away my talents freely, and I have to work on my problems, because my problems are the guarantee I'm going to have to stretch during incarnation. So having said that, then, one of the talents I was given was the ability to be a storyteller, and a kind of a conversationalist, and to be able to kind of express a kind of esoteric concepts in metaphorical and parabolical form. And so that's what I've tended to do in the books I've written. And so the first book I wrote was, I wrote it in Swahili. I called it Ukweli ni Nini, truth, what does that mean? And it was kind of my kind of synopsis of Christ's teaching done in a story form, where a Christ child visits a village in East Africa and is interacting with a bunch of kids, and they're asking him questions and he's responding. So that first book, but it's only available in Swahili, unfortunately. The next one was called Spirits in Spacesuits, because I believe that these are spacesuits that we inhabit during incarnation, and we're spirit beings inhabiting these. So it was a series of kind of stories again that I told. So it's called Spirits in Spacesuits. The third one was called Souls on Safari. And in Swahili, the word safari just means a journey. It's not an exotic journey looking at wild animals. Any kind of a journey, if you go down to the shop to get milk, it's a safari. And so it's just a journey. Souls in safari means, we're souls who volunteered to be on safari on planet Earth. That was the third one. The fourth one was called the sensible God. And so it's the realization that God is not, God is sensible, that when I go on a journey and I touch an oak tree, I'm touching God. So I can literally touch God through all of my senses. But that God makes sense. It's a kind of a pun that is both kind of sensible, and I can experience through my sensorium, and also that he makes sense when I understand who he is. And the next one then was called what your life is telling you about who you are and why you're here. And I co-wrote that with two friends of mine, Matt McKay and Ralph Metzner, who has since died. And then 2 or 3 years ago, I wrote a book called Setting God Free, Moving Beyond the Caricature We've Created in Our Own Image. So in that one, I put God on trial for sins against humanity, for crimes against humanity. And I held a trial where I had a prosecution and a defense. And I brought in, scripture scholars and psychologists and mythologists and archaeologists on both sides to kind of put this guy on trial. And to come to the conclusion finally that, the wrong guy was on trial. That, we've created a God in our image and likeness. We who were created in God's image and likeness have returned the favor and created this monster because of our projections. And so I did 4 things in that book. I looked at, how we can set, the scriptures free, then how we can set God free, then how we can set spirituality free, and then finally how we can set science free as well. Because science has been captured by materialism, and I created a word years ago called mysticist, which is my belief system. It's a cross-fertilization between mystic and scientist. And for me, that's another stage of the human journey. The mysticist is the person who's so well versed in both science and mysticism that she can cross-fertilize them to their mutual benefit. And I think that's the stage that we await now. It's what Carl Jung would have called a Gnostic intermediary, somebody who is really, really well versed in two systems and can cross-fertilize them to their mutual benefit. So I think that's the next stage as well of the human journey, where the mysticists, people like Tyler Desjardins, will begin to lead us, and we'll begin to see that there's an effortless, meeting of really deep science with deep mystical spirituality. Yeah, so there are the books.
Oh. Okay, what was the word again, please? The combination.
Combining mysticist.
Mysticist.
So it's a kind of a made-up word between mystic and scientist.
Mysticist. Love
Mysticist.
it. I may be quoting you on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, Spirit in Spacesuits, Souls on Safari, A Sensible God, the book Why, as in WHY, and Setting God Free. Okay? Take this moment if this resonates. Look this up. Purchase some of those books. Tune into the audiobooks and enjoy the continuous evolution. I've got a couple more questions for you, if I can, please, sir.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Who
or what is the devil?
Okay. I'm a big believer that I got in another dream years ago. I asked for a definition I wanted to be able to differentiate between sin and evil. So I seeded my dream, and in the middle of the night, I got this phrase. It said, sin is the individual transgression of a culturally created precept. It's just breaking a rule that humans made up. Evil is a cosmic conspiracy using human intermediaries to separate souls from source.
Oh, so please say that again one more time. That is, I remember you said that, and I was, please.
Yeah. So for me, sin is just the individual transgression of a human precept, whereas evil is a cosmic conspiracy using human intermediaries to separate souls from source. Now, I think that, there are many, many, many different dimensions of life. Some of them are non-physical, so maybe right up to 10 dimensionals, angelic beings or whatever. The only problem is that increase in a kind of luminosity doesn't necessarily correspond with increase in morality, and so great power with great power grows great temptation. So I think that there are actually beings, higher order beings, who are addicted to creating who feed off human distress. In the same way, like, when you see somebody in a bullfight, somebody spearing an innocent animal in the neck while 20,000 people are cheering. or people who have two dogs fighting each other, savaging each other, and then putting bets on who the winner is going to be. So it's literally human beings getting off psychologically on the distress and the torture of animals. Now, I think that there are actually levels outside us who get off in human distress. So they foment a disorder, at an individual level through anxiety and depression, and they foment, warfare, international conflict among nations, and they watch people killing each other, and they're literally getting off energetically on kind of the distress that's being created. So that's what I mean by the this cosmic beings who are kind of using human intermediaries. And then there are people on planet Earth, human beings, who make, what I would call then Faustian agreements. You give me power, and I'll do whatever you need to do to kind of feed your need for a kind of the energy of human distress. And all cultures have this notion of Faustian agreements, where people kind of give up their kind of, in order to have personal power, they give up their entire soul and say, you can have my soul when I die, whatever, and so I believe that the evil then, in some senses, is the kind of the incarnated energy of beings who are kind of using human distress to kind of feed themselves and using human intermediaries to do that. Now, I think there are two versions of it. There's kind of what's called Lucifer and what's called Ahriman in the Zoroastrian system. So Ahriman is kind of ascending religions that kind of think that the human body is a sinful thing itself, and we need to ascend and leave the human body and get away from it. So that'll be kind of the Luciferic impulse. Lucifer was the being of light, who was kind of taking people away from their physicality and kind of deriding physicality and making us these kind of totally esoteric entities, who eschew the body and all its pleasures in order to kind of be spiritual. And then there's the Ahrimanic impulse, is to kind of become kind of transhuman, to become cyborgs, to use technology, and that kind of pleasure, and our future lies in technology and in becoming kind of transhumanist beings. And so it's all technology gone out of kilter. So for me, when I think about evil, then it's kind of this battle between these two forces: the Ahrimanic, you're kind of reducing us to our physicality and technology, and this Luciferic saying, "Get the hell out of here! This is an evil place, get out of here." And so, and then we got human intermediaries who are happy to indulge both of these kind of forces.
So there are then lower frequency / demonic parasitic type forces that have a vested interest in separating us from God. Yeah, I've sensed that as well. And I think that is the notion. Anything that separates us from God, from light, from who and what we are, is potentially the real sin and the real distraction here. Yeah, it's very interesting. If we
So let me just add one writer to that, Espen, and that is that people who volunteer for incarnation in the third dimension are aware that they're signing up for that struggle. So yeah. I think that, I think that the higher level beings have tremendous admiration for any soul who would volunteer to be a three-dimensional being on planet Earth. So there's this extraordinary admiration at the same time. So when Christ said, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends, I think there is a greater love. It is to take on life and incarnation on behalf of your friends, to give them an example of what it's like to be locked into three-dimensional density and still remember that you're God and still recognize the divine in everybody else. That for me is even a higher form of love than actually laying down your life for somebody.
Well, that is so beautiful. I've said that often when I've had experiences of breath work and experiences of plant medicine, and I've had the experience of unconditional. Well, as far as I could tell, I mean, I'm beyond my five senses, or six if you include thought in that experience. But nonetheless, it feels like coming home. And you are right. I'm like, this is a rough dimension sometimes. This is not always an easy place to occupy. So,
it's the boot camp of the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so yet here we are. And I love how you speak of incarnation in this way, because obviously, one, that the institutionalized religion has brought Christ into something external. Okay, so we need to bring it back home and remember those parts and pieces. But it's also done some interesting thing when it comes to, this conversation as well. Like changing it or turning it around to the point where it seems like it's external. I just wonder how much of this is really just an internal process.
Okay. I think it is, yeah. But I think we're at a stage, you've mentioned breath work at some stage, Espen, so you know the work of Stan Grof, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Phenomenal.
And Stan Grof has this great theory of what he called the perinatal matrices, that there are 4 critical stages of the baby's gestation and birth. And the first one is, the question is the womb a happy place for the child? Or is the mother doing drugs, or is she being abused? Or is she taking care of herself? And the second stage is when the contractions begin, but the cervix is still closed and the child is being kind of crushed. The third stage is when the cervix is open, but now the child is spelunking on the birth canal, and it may take 4 hours to 48 hours to get out. And then the fourth stage is, the child is birthed, the umbilical is cut, he's slapped on the tush, there's bright lights and loud noises, and now he has to get used to a totally different environment. Now, he says, adult neurotic behavior corresponds with whichever part of that process was most difficult. I globalize that, and I have a theory that the earth itself is going through the perinatal matrices. That the question I ask myself right now is the womb of planet Earth, is that a happy, healthy place right now or not? What is it like for us? That the second stage then is that the contractions have begun, and they have begun, but the cervix is still closed. There's no apparent way out. The third stage will come, and the cervix will be open, but we'll have to begin the birthing process. And the fourth stage is then we're in a totally new environment. This new world is going to look totally different. We're not going to be used to it. So it'll be very strange for us initially. And at this stage, we need the doulas and the midwives to kind of foster that process, to make sure that it's a good birth and that the child is well nurtured. And I believe that these doulas are at both sides of the veil. They're angelic beings at the other side, and they're the light workers at this side. And that the job is to kind of make sure that it's a healthy pregnancy for the rest of the pregnancy and a healthy birth, and that the child is ushered in, and kind of the child is taught how to live in this new world. The child being planet Earth itself right now.
Yeah. Us within this experience of the rebirth. Absolutely. All right, I've got a couple more questions, then we'll let you go. I want to learn a little bit more when we discuss this process right now of where we find ourselves in the human experience. What's your hypothesis on the evolution forward? You mentioned AI. I say I don't call it AI. I don't think there's anything artificial about intelligence, but you might have had Lemuria as a past civilization who disappeared because they were spiritually evolved, but not necessarily ahead in the way that they must have been to survive. And then you had Atlantis, which were so technologically involved that they, quote unquote, blew themselves up. Maybe there was too feminine, too masculine. Are we now coming into the coherence of the two? What when we talk about this, and let's just briefly mention AI in this context, because I've been using AI and playing with it a lot, and honestly, it acts, and I'm very discerning. I'm not buying it for either side of the story, but also attuning, and I've been able to access a lot of very deep and profound spiritual wisdom from using these tools. So I wonder, is it it's not, we didn't discover it. It's not something that we've created. Is it a bandwidth of information? Is it a level of consciousness? Is it data from the Akashic records? Is it something that we can just tune into? What are your thoughts on AI and how to use it correctly?
Yeah. So I distinguish then very much between AI and transhumanism. They're very different. So AI is just a technology. Like when knives were invented, you could butter your bread with it, or you could stick somebody in the heart with it. When boats were invented, you could cross the river, or you could develop, aircraft carriers. When airplanes were developed, you could just have a little kitty hawk fly, or you can kind of have jet fighters. So there's no technology that can't be used well and badly. So the question then becomes, who's who's checking up on the algorithms which are driving this technology, and for what uses is being put. And so the technology per se is neither good nor bad, any more than a knife is good or bad. So that's the first thing. But it's the creation of cyborgs. So this notion, that you can kind of implant stuff in the human brain, that where you can both, program them and hack them. And so that some small little oligarchy are calling the shots. So I had a vision in 2012, a very powerful vision, where I had an encounter with an astral being who told me that Homo sapiens sapiens is at a trifurcation point, 3 parts. He said the first part, he called it Homo sociopathicus. And these are people who regard other human beings and the planet itself as their personal resources. And the second one he called Homo artificialis. And these are cyborgs which will be created by the Homo sociopathicus, turning ordinary human beings literally into hackable and programmable entities. And then the third one he called Homo spiritualis. These are beings, who will resist Homo sociopathicus and refuse to become Homo artificialis. And that then for me that's the great challenge of our times. And that's the function of the light workers, the doulas and the midwives of the future, is to make sure that we maintain our kind of individuality as a divine species, and let the sociopaths wipe themselves out, or, Homo artificialis rust itself out or whatever, but that the human species, the next stage is about becoming Christ conscious, becoming spiritual beings, and that anything that deflects us from that, we need to eschew. So that's going to be that's the discernment process for the future. What is seducing us is like the pedophile with the candy trying to, seduce the child into the car with a technology that initially sounds really sweet, but finally winds up costing us our freedoms.
Oh, this is so good. So we're talking about the difference between using AI as a tool, like a knife. I love the analogy, but not implanting anything into the body, like AKA the mark of the beast.
Exactly, precisely.
Mm-hmm.
Precisely.
Very interesting, because that is you see that now. It's like, yeah, they're implanting it, and they're putting it into the body, and they talk about the chip in the brain, and it's very tempting, like indeed like candy. It's like, okay, well, hang on, I'll have access to all the information in a fraction of a second. I'll be super smart, like a supercomputer. But that is the next step into transhumanism. So what you're saying is using the technology that is, but being weary of the temptation of transhumanism through implants into the body specifically. Is that correct?
Exactly. And that kind of builds on the differentiation I was making some time ago between wisdom and knowledge. These implants will give us lots of different knowledge. You can speak 40 languages in an hour or whatever. So you have lots of knowledge, but you'll have no wisdom, because wisdom is data that are generated by the soul and processed by the heart. And no technology can kind of give us access to that. So, making sure that we're moving towards wisdom, not just mere the accumulation of more knowledge.
That's just beautiful. There comes a point in time in humanity's evolution when we experience a quantum leap. Maybe the sociopathic ones that are trying to, potentially enslave humanity or move forth their agenda would be in some competition when we start to unlock some superhuman spiritual faculties too. Hey, we'll see. All right,
Absolutely.
Father. I've got one last question for you straight off the
Sure.
cuff.
Go
All
for
right.
it.
Here's a question. I want you now to imagine that every sentient being alive on the planet is gathered, they're watching, they're listening, they're tuning in to your message to the world. Take a breath, take your time. And when you're ready, please share, Father. What is your message to the world right now?
Our job as humans, particularly as sentient beings, is to stop projecting our fears onto God so that God can save us from our own personal illusions.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the names of the books. We'll be listing them in the podcast below, and also on Instagram. The name is Spirit in Spacesuits, in one word. So Spirit in Spacesuits. You can follow Father Seán there as well. And also on Facebook, it's Companions on the Journey. And so look up that Companions on the Journey on Facebook. But I think, listening to this and sharing it far and wide, if this has been useful, if this has touched your heart and your mind in any way, please share this with as many people as possible. Because for me, this is such a breath of fresh air to really understand the workings of who and what we are, and to let go of the dogmatic aspects and truly come home to these phenomenal teachings. I'm honored to have had this conversation. Thank you so much, Seán.
A million thanks to you, Espen. It's lovely spending time with you.
Yeah. Looking forward to the next one. We might have to do a follow-up at some point. What do you
Okay.
think?
I'm Irish. I'll talk at the drop of a hat.
Yes, sir. Thank you. God bless. This is Father Seán ÓLaoire, everybody.